There are a couple of things to note about these first two stanzas of Canto 1. The first thing to notice is that there is an alliterative quality to the verse. By that we mean that the poet used the lines of poetry here to repeat consonant sounds throughout the work. And he does it in line after line after line. This is called alliterative verse. And as we see the alliterative verse, an example, for instance, would be in the first stanza, right at the very end. It says, "Where war and rack and wonder often were seen therein." Notice that W, W, W sound. He does that in several places where he'll repeat the consonant sound, and you'll hear that as we go through. That alliterative verse comes up over and over again. In these first two stanzas, the poet begins in a place where we don't expect him to begin. We normally expect him to start right off with that story of Gawain and of Arthur's court, and it would make sense, I suppose, to us that he does. But instead what he does is he starts us off back with the war at Troy and talking about Aeneas and the fall of Troy and how that led to Rome and how that led to Britain and how that led to Arthur's court. What he's doing here at the very beginning is he is establishing the pedigree of Arthur. He's establishing that the Arthurian court is a direct descendant from that court of Troy. This is an old device. It's frequently used. It was used by Aeneid, Virgil's work. It was used in other texts as well, where they would establish the royalty or the pedigree of the court by connecting it back to those ancient civilizations of Rome and Greece. The poet here does this. He's connecting back the Arthurian court first to Troy and all the nobility that that entailed, and then on to Rome and all that that entailed as well, and then finally ending up with, here's our court in Britain, which is legitimized as the heir of all that civilization. There's another thing that he's doing here too. The civilization of Troy bore with it a certain courtesy, a way of acting, a chivalric manner, which the poet is going to emphasize throughout the work. Chivalry is something which he wants us to be very aware of, as something that has always held civilizations together. And that chivalry has been passed from Troy to Rome to Arthur's court. So that in the second stanza, he emphasizes that of all the kings of Britain, Arthur is the most noble, and it's his court that inherits then that chivalric code. Now that chivalric code is essentially a way of martial men restraining themselves. It dealt primarily with how a man of war would treat the enemy, would treat women, would treat the weak. It was a way of restraining that natural tendency in man to be belligerent, to use force and violence. And by speaking well, courteously or courteously with women, or by treating the weak a certain way, or by even honoring enemies in battle, a man distinguished himself as more than just a violent brute. He distinguished himself as somebody who was capable of maintaining civilization. Civilization is not based simply on the sword. It's also based on the high and noble idea that courtesy brings to us, that we are greater than mere animals. And that's what the poet is emphasizing here, this idea of chivalry, from the word for horse, cheval. This idea of chivalry is something which glues together civilization and makes civilization possible. Let's move on now to the next stanzas.